Yep.
We can see the screen. This is Donna and Marilyn from Tulsa.
Thank you, Donna. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Brandy, and I hope that everyone is off to a good start to your academic year. And we are excited to take and host our first MCMAP workshop webinar. And hopefully everyone has seen this check-in slide. So this shares, as this is a new software, as we're learning to take and use the software, this is the controls that you can use as an attendee. So you're able to take and join the audio right now. Our manager, Anna, is probably going to take and keep most people muted until the end, but you can take and raise your hand. And when you raise your hand, Anna will take and grab questions for you, and we'll go over the questions at the end of the webinar if that works out. So We're going to try this new thing, and we'll see how it all works. You can also throw questions into the chat, and we'll go from there. If we're ready to go. Okay, so let's try this. So, ooh, you're gonna have to give me a second because right now all of the chat is right in the middle of all of my slides. Okay, so good afternoon. I am Brandy. So you all met me, had the chance to meet me at the conference a couple of weeks ago now. Even though it seems like months and months, I'm sure everyone's had a lot going on in life since then. And what we're going to take and talk about today is different things that we can take and do in order to take and be prepared for any sort of safety concerns that might come up in running an outreach program. I wanted to take and start off this webinar by sharing why this whole entire talk came together. And it has a lot to do with the fact that when I was at a Circle on the Road conference, a math circle conference, several years ago, I received a phone call in which I found out that my father had spiral fractured his femur at the bottom of this canyon. And so I was at this conference and I found this out. There was nothing I could do at the time, but it very much made me aware of sort of a very intense situation while also thinking about Math Circle at the same time. As it turns out, my father was in the middle of nowhere. If you don't know much about the state of Idaho, believe me when I tell you there is no one and no one for anywhere close to where he fell down. And about 3 years before the whole entire situation, we probably wouldn't have found him in time. But he had all of the supplies. He had a buddy. He had things to take and help the emergency services find out where he was. And from the time of the accident to when he was in surgery was less than 6 hours. And so it's a situation that I was thinking a lot about, just how being prepared really changed the outcome of the whole entire scenario. As I said, 3 years earlier, it would have been a very different situation. They wouldn't have gotten to him in time, but because he had all of the supplies, because he was prepared, I got to hang out with him 2 weeks ago. So it really made me think about the fact of what can we do within our Math Circle programs to take and make sure that we're prepared just in case there is a situation. As I said, he's doing live and well. All is good. So this is where sort of the inspiration for this particular webinar came about. Just the whole thought that a little bit of pre-programmed thought goes a long way. I was reading over the questions before I got ready for the webinar, and one of the specific questions came, what is this funky little slide that's going on here? And the whole entire idea is that the slide on the right shows us that with a little bit of planning, we can damp the magnitude of any sort of emergency that might happen. Because the reality is emergencies still are going to happen. Students are still going to have paper cuts. Students are still, there might be 30 seconds, 3 minutes where we don't know where one of our students are. We might have a teacher that is involved in our program that has a diabetic incident. We aren't quite sure. Emergencies are going to happen. But by planning for those emergencies, we can make it so that they're a lot less chaotic, that our program stays together a whole lot more, and that we feel better about it in the whole entire end. So in other words, this was my one way of trying to take and throw a little bit of mathematics into the webinar today, since we are a Math Circle program. By taking and doing some emergency planning ahead of time, we're able to take and damp the magnitude of the emergencies that we have to take and deal with. So what are we going to talk about today? I thought the best way to start off is to think about everything that I take and bring together in my Math Circle box as I'm running a program. Then I'm going to talk about some things specifically to think about when working with students who happen to be minors. I'm going to talk about the waivers and other paperwork I gather. And then I'm going to talk specifically what we can do as a group to take and plan for an emergency. So let's get started. My Math Circle box, everything I bring to a Math Circle session. If I'm honest, this is everything that I'm bringing. And it seems a little bit overwhelming, but let's go ahead and let's take it apart piece by piece and see what's going on here. First of all, we have math supplies. I think that this is one of the things when we're trying to take care of all of the details that it's easy to take and overlook. But by taking and making sure that you have pencils and paper available in order to take and do the math circle, especially when you have a guest speaker, it can make everything go a lot smoother. Especially what I have started to find is having graph paper, if we're trying to take in and show students how to take and organize their work, having graph paper, especially for the younger students, can be really important. One of the things that I did recently is I actually made graph paper with about 1-inch squares rather than the smaller squares that you can buy. And we found that that meant that students spent less time drawing out tables, but instead were able to just use the tables much more quickly and focus on the mathematics. I also add chalk and whiteboard markers because it's important to take and know something about the location that you're going to be doing your math circle in and what supplies are going to be available there. My current math circle, I've run it in a school cafeteria, so I can't use chalk or whiteboard markers. I end up bringing in a lot of poster paper, and we end up doing work on the poster paper on the ground, and that's been quite successful for that particular location. Next is a lesson in your back pocket. So life happens. Sometimes it's just a case of whoever you had planned to take and do the math circle shows up sick. Perhaps you yourself end up sick. And it's important that you have a plan for what you're going to do if that happens. This is one of the things that I really love about the Circle in a Box document. And you have access to that whole entire document within the math circle training materials. But I have the copies made for the students that I have or the teachers that I have at my program so that all I'd have to do is hand this off to somebody and they'd be able to run the program. This works really well if you know that the math circle is not going to work at all for that particular day, that whoever was going to teach the session isn't going to show up at all. I also like to have the alternative. Sometimes it's just nice to have a problem for about 10 minutes while whoever's supposed to be teaching the session shows up. Maybe they're stuck in traffic. Maybe they couldn't find a parking spot. In that case, I like to have some sort of warm-up problem for whoever is sort of welcoming the students to make sure that, that we can at least do something while we're waiting for the other person to show up. So just spending a little bit of time to think through a plan just in case you get sick or whoever you're working with does get sick. The next thing that I always bring is some sort of first aid kit. When I take and think through these things in regards to taking and being safe, one of the main resources that I look at is a Girl Scout document called Safety Wise. My logic behind that is the fact that the Girl Scout organization has been doing outreach programs for a very long time. And they have a lot of thoughts, a lot of good knowledge about how to safely work with large groups of people, large groups of students, large groups of adults. And so I look at what they suggest. And one of the things that they suggest is to have a first aid kit, but also to be very aware of what I use that first aid kit for. So I have bandages. When I was working with high school students, I had extra feminine hygiene products, but I also don't have any sort of medicine within that first aid kit. I would never prescribe any pills or give any pills to a specific student. We have a small outreach program. We would send people home before we would call a parent to pick them up before we would ever give them any sort of medicine. For me specifically, in thinking about first aid and trying to be more aware of a sort of first aid emergency, I do myself stay first aid certified. I do that specifically because I'm working with such young students. I'm working with 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. And so the Red Cross does take and provide first aid training specifically for people that are working with pediatric students, and that will help talk through things like how you would do the Heimlich remover on a small child and things like that. So I do carry a first aid kit with me, and I also make sure everyone that I work with, whoever is taking and volunteering, knows where that first aid kit is. It's in a giant red bag, so it's very obvious. So far we have math taken care of. So far we have any sort of like paper cuts taken care of. The next thing we need to think of is snacks. This was a little bit funny. When I was running my outreach program in Oakland right after school, it was very important that we make sure that we provide snacks for the students, because they weren't going to make it until dinner and be able to focus on the mathematics. But we also really made sure that the food wasn't distracting. I had one teacher that was making these amazing quesadillas or nachos or all sorts of fun things as snacks, but the students got so into the focus of making the snacks that they got really distracted from the focus of taking and doing the mathematics. A couple of the things that I think about is I tend to not get really sugary snacks. That might be something, if you have parents bring snacks, that you have little control over. Something that you do need to control, though, is any sort of allergies that you may have amongst your participants. And this is where I say, even though a lot of what we're going to talk about today is focused on students, knowing the allergies for the adults that are involved in your group can also make it a much more pleasant environment. So whether or not it's peanuts, or it's going to be gluten, or vegetarian, or any sort of like allergy or preferences, it's really important to take and be aware of that. For peanuts, it's important to I tend to avoid any snack or anything that has peanuts. That's just been my approach to it, because so many students these days have a level of allergy to peanuts that is unreal to me. It just makes me very uncomfortable. So for the outreach events, if I don't know your kids, I'm not going to ever serve them peanuts. But for any other allergies, you're going to take and check over their paper waivers, and we'll talk about that. And I do believe in using hand sanitizer for large group events. So that's another thing to just have. If you have it out, most students are used to sort of using it before they grab food. And we can talk about microbiome and everything, but that starts to digress. But I do think for large groups of students that are coming from a diverse set of different schools, that it's important to take and sort of kill the bacteria that they're bringing along with them. Okay. Paperwork. I'm going to take and talk a little bit more about paperwork later on, but one of the things that I think in regards to specifically liability paperwork, but I do think that depending on your particular program, there can be some paperwork that will make things easier. For me, I always have a packet to welcome any new students that will give them information about the calendar, make sure that they have waiver information, and they're able to take and make sure that their parents know what time to pick them up, things like that. I bring all of that with me to every session, just in case I do have a new student, a friend of a friend that shows up for that particular session. If you do pre-applications and are only accepting a limited number of students, that sort of thing would apply to you. I also bring the completed and blank participant waivers. I'm going to say this multiple times because I think it's important. If we go to all of the work to take in collecting parent signatures, emergency contact information for the parents, emergency contact information for the adults that are participating in our program, if that is locked in my office 10 minutes away from the event, we've sort of defeated the whole entire purpose of collecting the waivers. The waivers provide us at the time, right when we need it, emergency contact information or any allergies or prescriptions. So it's important that we have those completed waivers at the actual site where the circle is happening. And then depending on if you're paying your instructors or paying your teachers to participate, I find collecting that paperwork at the time that you actually see them tends to take and ensure that you get much more of that paperwork back in a timely manner. So I bring all of these things with me to just sort of make my life a little bit easier as we take and keep going with our circle. So that's what's all in my box. I'm carrying a combination of math materials, snacks, extra stuff, just in order to take and try to pre-plan and be prepared in case anything happens at my circle. Just trying to take and make the best of it. You can see in this picture when I was working over at Oakland and we had a lot more students involved, we had quite the pile of snacks every single week. So quite the endeavor, but I think also made it so that we could really focus on the mathematics. So we are prepared, we've showed up at the circle, and now we want to start thinking about some of the things that we need to be aware of at the circle when we are working with students who happen to be minors. I make this focus because I think, especially if we're working with high school students, it's easy to sort of just believe that they're small little adults, and so to treat them as such. But I do think that when we're talking specifically about safety, we need to recall that these students are minors and that there's different things that we need to do to work with them. So again, one of the things I do is I look at two different sources. I am a lifetime Girl Scout, so I still think that safety-wise, this document that the Girl Scout organization has put together of everything that they do to keep their girls safe is a great resource to take and look at in regards to how to keep our students safe at our programs. They tend to go more things like backpacking, which we probably aren't doing too often in Mass Circle, but it still provides at the very beginning some thoughts about adult ratios and other ways to keep students safe. The other place that I need to go in order to take and make some of these decisions is the actual location that I am at that's hosting my circle. So in this particular case, you can see the waiver that was required of us because we were at San Francisco State University. Our university itself, just by having a program on campus, required this particular form. We couldn't adjust it. We had to use this one. And so that meant that any students that were coming to the program at San Francisco State needed to fill out their form and my waiver form. And it was something that I had to be aware of. In addition, it meant that San Francisco State had a background check process that they required of anyone that was working with K-12 students. So just my location set up a lot of the restrictions that I had for safety. And so taking and checking with your particular school, I think will provide you a lot of insight and sort of direction in how to take and get started for doing these sorts of things. The insight that I had to get started in regards to the Girl Scouts, what they provided was this whole idea of student to adult ratios. And so this is the numbers that is provided by SafetyWise from the Girl Scout manual. They suggest that you should have 2 adults in the room for every 12 kindergarten students, for every 20 first and third grade students, 25 4th through 6th grader students, and every 30 7th through 12th grade students. So I focus on the fact that 30 students, 30 high school students, that seems fairly reasonable, but it still has 2 adults. And we're doing that because it leads to the next policy, which has a lot to take and do with using the buddy system. We want to make sure that students are never left alone with one student. And so we want to take and make sure that there's never a situation when we are in a case of if we only had 1 adult in the room for those 30 high school students, if everyone except for that last student left, there wouldn't be anyone to be a buddy with the adult that is there. And so I like the idea of having 2 adults be a part of your program. It also provides a backup situation should one of you be sick. It would be the worst case scenario. You could have one of you still be there. And then in that case, you would be more aware of just making sure that you always kept 2 students in the room. So this is a way to take and just be aware of how many students we should make our classes sizes for Mass Circles, as well as just being aware of how many adults we should start trying to recruit. One of the questions that I came across is, as we were preparing for the webinar, is this whole idea of adult background checks. And so my particular way how I've gone about it is that I make any adult who regularly volunteers for my program or regularly is paid by my program, who works one-on-one with students, I make all of them do adult background checks. So what I'm trying to take and distinguish from there is that if I have a mathematician that just came for one day and is going to give one presentation, I wouldn't have them do a full background check. But I also wouldn't have them be the main adult that's in charge of working one-on-one with students for that day. There would be a local volunteer, somebody that's been involved in my program, that would take and stay and also be there to take and support the person that was presenting. This all ties into, and I think I said this during the conference, so I want to reiterate it. I trust everyone I work with. But I also want to protect my students, and I never want to be the story that ends up on the news. And we talked about this, and everyone got a little bit awkward about it. so this is the approach that I've taken to take and deal with that. For my particular experience, there's 2 ways that you can take and find support in order to take and learn more about getting background checks for your adults that are participating. First of all, if you work with a local K-12 school site, it's possible that they already have a background check for any volunteers that are working in those K-12 schools, so they would provide a good resource. For my particular local site, once we've done that background check, that student or that adult would be cleared for 3 years, and we wouldn't have to do that again. When I worked at San Francisco State, they required us, for every adult that volunteered regularly, to do a full FBI fingerprinting background check. It was around $50 to $90. But the advantage of that particular one was that if anything should happen, should this person suddenly have a record, updates about that were sent to San Francisco State, and then those updates were sent to the program directors of the volunteers. And so that let it stay more updated in regards to anything that might happen. Our school had various programs that would cover that background check fee. And that also seems like a very good thing to be asking for in a grant, to sort of say, like, we would like to keep our students safe, and this is one fee that you can help us cover. So we are at the circle, we are getting adults to the circle, and we're starting to take and think about how to stay safe. So one of the things, I say this over and over again, we want to use the buddy system. It means that we want never to have an adult left with one student, but that also means that we want to take and make sure that the students are always in a buddy. When I was working at my program in Oakland, we had students that were really fighting us on this. They said, oh, we're high school students, we should be able to go to the bathroom by ourselves, this is ridiculous. And one of the teachers I worked with became very insistent and very much shared, like, you also, if we just send somebody to the bathroom, we don't know who is in the bathroom. We don't know what adults are in the bathroom that we may not be aware of. So that's why it's always important to always send 2 students to the bathrooms together anywhere. Once they are leaving your program, if they are walking away, they should always have 2 of them together. So using the buddy system, I find that it's easy to take and remember and straightforward. In regards to how that looks in practice, for elementary students, I just check the sheet when a student arrives. I send them anytime they leave. I leave them in a pair with an adult. And then before the elementary student leaves, an adult has to sign them out. For the middle and high school student, what that looks like is that the high school student or middle school student checks the sheet when they arrive so that I know how many students have attended my circle every session. I send them to the bathroom in pairs. I make sure that they check out with an adult before they leave. And I also make sure that every student actually leaves the circle location. So I bring that up because, again, we tend to take and think of middle schools and high school students as being fairly self-reliant, but life still happens to them, and we want to make sure if mom or dad, whoever was supposed to pick them up, had life happen, that they still have a way to get home or are able to take and navigate that. So we still want to support them and make sure that we're looking out for them. Goodness, we're still going. We're getting there. So the next thing that I want to think about in order to take and work with students safely is I want to think about online student interactions. I think that there's a bigger and bigger push, especially for us to have interactions with our students through Facebook pages. And so we need to start thinking about how we want to do that safely. I covered this very, very quickly at the conference, so I want to go over it a little bit more slowly. I want to think about the fact there's varying degrees that we can be online. So first, we might be able to say, look, there's a program. Contact me for more information. That's about what I do with my elementary program. I just sort of say, look, we're doing a program. This is who you get a hold of if you want to participate. Next, we might add, here's a program location, here's my contact information, and here's the date. That means if somebody really wanted to find the student, they could find the location and the date, but they wouldn't know within that location where to go, and they wouldn't know much more. So still, it's a little bit more risky, but it's not too risky. When we start to get more risky, we're starting to look at online social interactions for group members, but we can make that a little bit less risky by making sure that we only have those online social interactions happening when group members have been approved by a moderator. So that means that this is my circle, I know every single student that is signed up, and their parents have given them permission to be involved in this particular online social interaction, and I'm watching what they're saying back and forth to each other. And lastly, we have open social interactions. This allows the students to take and interact with each other, but also lets any other sort of people to take and log in and interact with them as well. And that's when you start to get, especially for students that are under 13, you don't want to have any sort of form of this happening. It starts to become much, especially for students that are under 13, you need to take and think about possibly having waivers so that parents are aware that their students are interacting in this way, and that this is all part of the circle. I would still sort of definitely want to be very involved in that whole entire program and watching the interactions that these students are having. Which leads us into waivers and other paperwork. Paperwork that we want to think about. So for those of you that are mainly doing programs for adults that sort of phased out a little bit in that last section, this is time for you to start listening back up. So I really advocate, I really think that any sort of person that is involved, whether it's an adult, whether it is a student, anyone that is involved in your Mass Circle program should be taking and signing a waiver and release. And so what we want to think about is how to take and turn this document from something that's just sort of annoying to something that really helps us take and support the program and keep our students safe. So what we want to think about is a combination of like sharing useful program information on the form and also gathering liability information. So if I color code this, if you look at my particular waiver for my program, I have a lot of liability information. I look at the fact that I have permission to be at this location, that the students can participate in the event, we understand the risks. A lot of this verbiage came directly from the people that were funding us, and so that would be a good place to look for this. But you could also use versions of mine. When you go down below to the next group, we have no seriously. Here's my signature. We give permission, we waive claims, anything against you, your organization, it's all okay. For our particular program, this program, they even asked us to list our funders as somebody that no one would sue, even the funders. So everyone was listed. None of these people are liable. Underneath that, you can see that I have emergency contact information. So this is who are we going to call day of? Anyone that could pick up your kid if they were sick. Like this has to be somebody that could actually show up and pick up your kid and respond to an emergency. So I don't want somebody that is in New York. I want somebody that is here at your program. And then lastly, I collect peanut allergies, insulin allergies, bee allergies. And the key component of this is I can collect it. I can gather all of these things, but if I don't actually look at it, then it doesn't actually prove to be useful. So it's important to gather these things, check that you have signatures, check that you have contact information, and actually read through the allergies. So that's everything that you're gaining off of this. But in addition to that, you're sharing useful program information. So in the process of sharing the permission to be at the site, then you're also sharing all the information about the site. You're telling them when you're meeting. You're telling them where you're meeting. You're actually taking and reading through those things as they're signing this waiver. You're getting the opportunity to actually get permission to use these students' photos and other publicity things. That means that your program can be promoted using the pictures from these students. You can collect that information. It also gives you a chance, as long as you're going to make people sit down and sign the signature and put all the work into making emergency contact information, it also gives you a chance to start gathering things like their particular school, their grade level, their teacher. These are people that you could reach out to in order to take and continue to grow your program. You can say, hey, I have Susie and Juan in my program, and they're both in your class. Would you like me to come and give a presentation to your class? And we can talk about trying to get more students from your class to my program. And the last thing it has is this option for people to write down their email address, their actual address, so that you have this contact information, this whole database of places that you can take and send out program reminders so that you can take and continue to promote your program. It gives you useful program information to be able to continue to grow your program. So hopefully between these two things, you can see, even though it is a little bit of a hassle to gather all of this information, hopefully the idea of what I'm trying to share is the fact that it can be quite useful to you and to your students to take and have to collect these waivers and to collect this paperwork. And as I said before, one of the key components, this only works if you actually have the waiver on site. So what I tend to do is once I've received the signatures, I will scan the waiver and I will save it in a secure Google folder. And then I will take and send that particular waiver back to my Math Circle site every single week. It's part of the box. Like once we've scanned it, it goes in the box and it just gets carried to the circle every single week. And I let the people, the adults that are in charge, know that the waivers are there so that if anything happens, they have the ability to contact the responsible people, to contact the husband or wife of one of our participants should they have any sort of emergency, the parents of one of our participants should they have an emergency. So it's a good way to take and provide just in case anything happens. One specific question that came up also in preparing for the webinar was this whole idea of what specific sign-out sheets. Is there requirements for sign-out sheets? If we're going to have a requirement for waivers, is there something specific that we take and do for other paperwork? And so this is my particular answer. For high school students or middle school students, I just do one sign-in sheet, and I do that so that I can track every single week how many students are coming to the program, how many teachers are coming to my program, so that when the grants people or when somebody from the news article asks me how many people are coming, I'm not just making up that number. I actually have records that will tell me how many people are there. For elementary students, I do take it one step further. So we check when they show up, but I actually have a sign out sheet. And what I do on that sign out sheet is it lists every single parent that is any parent or guardian or anyone that is allowed to pick up that particular student. I highly encourage people that know that they're going to be carpooling to list the other adult as somebody that can take them home with them. And so that I know which kids left and I know who picked that kid up. This particular thing is modeled after a lot of daycares or summer camps do this particular practice. But it also came up because we had a situation in one of our years that a grandfather showed up to take and pick up a kid. The kid did recognize the grandfather, but we had never met this person before. And so we wanted to have somebody that we could call to say, is it okay? Are they allowed to go home with this person? We wanted to make sure we would have really appreciated knowing ahead of time. And this is one way to communicate to the parents that we aren't going to send your kid home with anyone. We want you to tell us who we can send your kid home with. And that leads us to the very last part, putting all of these pieces together to plan for an emergency. So what I have done in the past, what this has led to in trying to take and think through this, is really creating a document that literally says what we are going to take and do in the case of emergency. This is modeled after something that I saw at a location that we worked at once. It talks about all of the phone numbers if we're severely injured, everything to call if it's just a serious injury, and then also gives a location for a particular site. It shows on a map where we are. And so that is something that was inspired by something that I saw at one of our locations, and I think it's been really helpful. Because what we need to think about is, it's one thing if our student gets sick or if one of our teachers gets sick, but if for example, this is a map when I was running my circle in Oakland. You can see the two suns, those are the locations of my circle. And you can see the green dots are where all of my students were from, the yellow dots are where all of my teachers were from. And so that meant that I just had people coming from all over. And if there would have been an earthquake, should there have been ever a problem, that means that there might be a delay in those adults picking up those students. And I have to think about, what am I going to do? Where am I going to take these students? Because I didn't get to leave that site. I don't get to leave the circle until every single one of those adults, those students, have been released to an adult or have gone home. And so it's important to think through your school, your meeting location, and think through the process that you're going to have should you have an emergency. So as I said, what we did for our particular site, inspired by one of the locations that we were at, is we took down all of the phone numbers. We looked at who is it? Do we call San Francisco police? Do we call the emergency dispatch on campus? What do we do? Where are we located in this whole entire thing? And if we have to evacuate, what location would we evacuate to? This was a job that I was able to take and work with my local administration people. They had access to a lot of this information that the location had given it to them, and we were able to take and condense it down into a format that I could give to every single adult that was involved in my program. It also helped us figure out things like the fact that San Francisco State was so close to the freeway that if you were to call 911, you ran the problem that they would give you to the California Highway Patrol rather than to the local San Francisco emergency. So that was why we learned that you needed to take and actually call the campus police rather than taking and calling 911 from our particular site. So what we're thinking through. I've given you tons of information very quickly, but what I want to leave you with is just the thought of what is a little bit of pre-programming thought that you can put into your program that's going to just help reduce the magnitude of issues. I've said a lot, and it's a little bit disconcerting because I've said it all to just space. So hopefully everyone has been able to follow along and it's going well. So what I want to leave you with, what I want to challenge you to, is to think about what training based off of this do you need to do to work with those that you work with at the circle around safety issues. Have you introduced everyone to the buddy system? Are we using that? Are we making sure that everyone is staying safe by always sending students, always being in buddies whenever we're in a situation? Are you collecting paperwork? If you are collecting paperwork, where are you accessing it? Where are you storing it? Have you thought through first aid procedures? Is there a way that you can take and document injuries? Is there a way, like, just in case you know where the first aid kit, things like that, just making sure that you've thought through, is there a first aid kit even available? And what is going to be your emergency procedure? If you do have something happen, what's going to be the plan? What I do for my particular location is I make sure that every single student, undergrad that I'm working with, programs my personal cell phone number into their phones right away. Because I want to make sure if something happens to them that they're able to communicate it to me. If I happen to not be at the circle, that they're able to communicate it to me. I want to hear about it as quickly as possible so that I can support them. You also want to think through the procedures and timelines. So you need to do a background check for the students, the adults that are involved in your program. And lastly, just making sure, have you thought about the buddy system? I would say out of everything in regards to things that can help you quickly, very quickly, is making sure to implement the buddy system within your program. Around this, one of our mentors, Addie, actually shared a suggested survey that she actually takes and gives to everyone that participates in her training. This is a training that she actually, a survey that she sends out to the adults that are involved in her program. And this checks with them to make sure that they have the same understanding about what they are going to take and do should different things happen at their particular program. They do a much more intensive training especially because they had a summer program. So when you start to deal with students, summer programs, it tends to become much more intense. But they also went through and thought about, what are we going to do if we lose a student, right? So how long do we wait? When do we call the police? What do we do? What are we going to do if a parent or guardian doesn't show up? What are we going to do if we don't feel comfortable sending a student home with a guardian? A lot of these questions are focused on students, but I think similarly we could take and think about through our emergency procedures with adults and teachers, what are we going to do if somebody feels ill? How are we going to get them home? What are we going to do if I don't feel well enough to be able to come in on a specific day? So with that, we should be close to the end. I want to make sure that we take and think through the questions. I know that we have, they've been putting together a list of questions over here, or not. So nobody had any questions, so we're good. Does anybody in the chat or anybody want to unmute themselves and be able to ask a question? Okay. Well, you all must feel super trained and super ready. So I will take and post all of these resources. We'll post the slides as well as the webinar to the training folder that we had previously. And if anyone does have any further questions, then please let me know. I know that when Diana heard this presentation last time, she sort of had to take some time to sort of process it before she was ever ready to talk about it. So please, if there's questions that come up, posting them to the MC Map Google group, I think would be a great way to work with that, or just emailing us and letting us know. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Cecilia. This is all great. So with that, I wish you all a wonderful afternoon. Thank you all for participating in our first webinar.